Winnipeg has a very special place in my heart. I actually came to Winnipeg a few years ago, maybe a couple of years ago for the very first time, maybe 3 years ago, where for Drop the Mic for Black History Month, where I performed some of my poetry. So there's something for me that just really feels meaningful about being able to come back. I'm in my living room, but virtually come back, virtually come back to spaces where I have been, and where some of the work that is in this book now, in the format of this book, actually existed as performances and spoken word pieces before. So it's just really, really meaningful. So thank you everyone for making the space happen. So I'm just going to dive right in. So this is ZOM-FAM. Yay! It's my debut poetry collection. And so ZOM-FAM is comprised of 8 poems, because they each are actually long form poems that tell the stories of, what it meant to grow up as a queer child in the 80s and 90s on the plantation of Mauritius, and the plantation island, sorry, and what it means to live within the legacy of the plantations, and the multiple ways in which we try to find voices to express ourselves, to birth ourselves into being within the colonial silences. So what I do with each of the poems, really, they really intimate, they all really grounded in, I put into conversation the family home and the island. So there's a constant shift between the home and the island, and there are multiple stories that emerge from the silences of the family as the character in it, which is heavily based on me, clearly, finds their voice, actually. So I'm going to dig right in, and I'm going to read 2 pieces from the book today. The first piece that I'm going to read is Your Body is the Ocean. I thought I would read Your Body is the Ocean because that's the title that we, so, this is the last event of a book tour across Canada, which all happened in my living room. But, and Your Body is the Ocean is the title we gave, the name of the book tour. So I thought, oh, I haven't actually read this piece at all during the tour. So I'll delve into this. And also everything in the book actually is written in the first person, except for 2 poems, and Your Body is the Ocean is one of those that's written in the second person. So I'll read that for you. Toliko se tolakas, toliko se enzil, toliko se tolakas, toliko c'est l'océan. Take a deep breath. Expand your timid lungs as wide as you can. Breathe in the salty air of the island, the humidity of Cure-Pipe, the musky fumes of Saint-Julien. Satiate your chest with the gentleness of moss, the golden chimes of hope inflate your belly like red, blue, yellow, green balloons rising to the sky. Console l'indépendance. Extend this breath to the deepest chambers in your body, the unknown spaces where there are stories hidden that you are yet to discover. Like the unsent letters you wrote, wrapped in tender green fabric and coconut rope, hid under the pile of clothes in your closet. Breathe deep and breathe out. Breathe out the amber of life. Breathe out the flame of resilience. Breathe out the heat of forbearance. Breathe out the swell of light that will guide you through nights dark and endless like the Kala Pani. You are the child of survivance. Your skin will spread and rise, stretched out vertically like a sculpture, a monument demanding to exist, to be recognized, to occupy space. Your bones will mold themselves in a chrysalis of fortitude, collecting strength from the compost of the earth, learning not to rust, not to crumble, not to break under the wilting weight of adulthood. Your hair will sprout and grow in length, in strength, in thickness, in pride. Curls like dark snakes in an occult dream will bounce and twirl like a proud prophecy, proclaiming august visions of the past and the future to the winds. Put a hand to your chest. Listen to the cadence in your rib cage, running wild and feverish like horses stomping across the Champ de Mars. Feel the swelling of life under your skin, the ripple of blood flowing, salt water lapping along the coastlines of your body. Voices refusing to be silent, songs refusing to disappear, screams demanding their oscillation be heard in the ripples of the ocean. There will be pain, deep pain that will settle like sediment in your marrow, that will calcify like sandstone in your throat, that will fossilize like mud on your tongue. You will find ways to truncate your roots from memory, to escape yourself and others, catching planes and trains, hiding in the safety of metal boxes, stretching the distance between you and your home, you and your island, you and your body, you and your pain. No matter the borders, fences, walls, masses of lands, bodies of waters that you put between you and your home, you and your island, you and your body. The pain is something that you just can't leave behind. You will drag its festering weight halfway across the globe in a heavy, invisible suitcase. Grief, the size of your ribcage, heartache, the length of your spine, a burden that you just can't leave behind. The worst thing that could happen to you will happen to you. And the best thing that could happen to you will also happen to you. So make friends with your bones, soak them overnight in coconut oil, rub them in banana leaves and polish them under the moonlight. Rub salt inside of your pores and crust the cracks in your skin, your scars and imperfections, dried fruit crystallized on a copper platter yielded to Surya for preservation. Offer your earthy armor to the open skies. Let the burn of soul purify your pain. The rawness of tears purge your wounds. The churn of waves cleanse your island body. Dig mountains with the edges of your hip bones. Sculpt temples from the softness of your lips. Make homes for the sacredness of your stories. Your body is home. Your body is an island. Your body is home. Your body is the ocean. You are the child of lineages, of ceremonial femmes who dreamt you up, reshaped the universe so they could give birth to you. A promise, a celebration, an offering, a pact, an omen, an earthen lamp on your ancestors' altar, molten lava exploding in the belly of a volcano, roaring fire at sunset, echoes of Ravane, Baravan Triang, craquement du bois qui a fait brûler, la fumée qui peut monter là-haut, côte noire, nous bandes ancêtres, côte noire, nous bandes histoires, bandes grands jimoun qui tirent fils, disparaître, bandes hommes-femmes, qui continuent à vivre dans nous les quais, qui continuent à vivre dans nous la veine. There are languages you do not yet speak, words you do not yet know, music you have never heard, magic you have never felt, but you will learn that they have been with you, within you all this time, which is why I am here to tell you, child, you will not learn to love yourself, but I am learning to love you. So this was Your Body is the Ocean, which is one of the pieces in ZOM-FAM. So the story behind ZOM-FAM actually is that before this, this script actually became a book, ZOM-FAM is initially written as a performance. It was written for the stage. The piece is a 90-minute solo where that combines dance and ritual and theater and poetry, where the poetry actually moves across the stage through the body, which is what I wanted to explore through this performance. And it's only at a later point that the manuscript for the stage became a book. And when I had to turn the manuscript into a book, one of the questions that I actually asked myself was, how could I bring the performative quality of the work onto the page? And so I really started thinking of the poetry as the body of the text, as like the poetry as a body of text that is performing on the page. So I hope you get a copy of the book and hold it in your hands, and also let the book carry you in this way, because everything in the book is laid out in very intentional ways, in that sense. And there's a kind of musicality that I wanted, and performativity that I wanted to bring to even the body of the text. So I do encourage you, to actually have a look at it in that way too, and see what that does for you in terms of like a poetry and holding the object in your hands. So I will read one more piece, and then we'll get to chat with Jenny, which is something that I'm so excited to do this evening. The next piece that I'm going to read actually is the piece called ZOM-FAM. It's actually the piece ZOM-FAM from the book. So I will read this piece for you. When I tell my mother that I am trans, her lips wobble a minor tremor, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She smiles with compassion. She speaks her golden heart, soft, warm, welcoming. Her eyes cast a resilient glow. She does not need to tell me. She does not need to tell me about our history, because our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies. But her body, her brown, exhausted body, speaks of her childhood. I see in her old eyes the grimy streets of Port Louis, grey, dusty, stifling under the burning sun. I see in the drooping ridges around her cheeks the cold embrace of banyan trees when the summer heat became too heavy to bear. I see in the shakiness of her lips melted tar gluing itself to her 8-year-old feet. In the streets of the capital, poverty was a sticky business. Particles of blackness stained the virtuous skin of childhood. I see in my mother's shiny forehead, in the beads of sweat that placed themselves evenly on her skin, a child pushing a cart. Unde putu adu so. Unde putu adu so. Those sweets that her godmother made diligently with freshly crushed coconut and ground rice, and that she'd push in a cart every single day of her life from Plaine Verte all the way to Cité Sainte-Croix. Unde putu adu so. Unde putu adu so. When I look deep into the battered trenches under my mother's eyes, I see copper coins shifting hands, churchgoers, beggars, children, sex workers, faithful and unfaithful, unwrapping round coconut crown rice sweets from the humidity of newspapers, dipped into hot black tea, an everyday ritual of my mother's childhood in Cité Sainte-Croix. When I tell my mother that I am trans, her withered hands shake like dried twigs forgotten by history, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She tells me, pas tracasser toi Kama, te connais, dis mon comment toi tout le temps tiens à ça. She tells me that we come from a history and a culture where the men, women, and the women, men have always existed. That people like me are present in our myths and our religions, and that for as long as she can remember, Vie Dimun, the elders, they spoke of the men, women, and the women, men. Her eyes mirror phantom images, lucid narratives line her haunted lips. She whispers into the soles of my feet that she vaguely remembers an old relative who lived close by when she was a child, who was, in her words, of my kind. But she immediately closes her heart, fetters her lungs, stitches her throat with a filament of concealment. She threads the unspoken between our bodies because our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies. But every day since, I dream of my mother's childhood. And I dreamed of this old relative who was of my kind. Sometimes I call him Pajani. Sometimes I call him Devakumar. Sometimes I call her Padet. Sometimes I call her Nila. But most of the times I call her Kumkum. I dream of Kumkum with round shoulders, a blood-red bindi on her forehead, a glint of gold hanging over the edge of her pointed nose, raven curly hair, a tad too greasy but that still bounces up and down the nape of her neck as she walks in the morning sun. Kumkum wears plain cotton kurtas that she haggles in the markets of Plaine Verte. And if she ever gets invited to a wedding, she adorns herself of her most prized garment, a brocaded red salwar kameez that wraps her rottened body like the heavy skin of syrupy lychee. Kumkum eats rice, dal, and pickles during the week, And on weekends, she treats herself to some dried salted fish cooked with onions, fresh thyme, and tomatoes. And bon tirougaille poisson salé, bien mauricien. And bon tirougaille poisson salé, bien mauricien. Kum Kum has a radio set. And she listens to the news and avis de décès every morning and Hindi songs every evening. Kum Kum rubs coconut oil in her thick black hair every Friday. Kum Kum has a job. She works in the tobacco factory in the capital city with all the poor women whose husbands had died in obscure wars nobody on the island really knows about. They fought in a faraway British war and never came back. On her lunch break, Kum Kum does not step out with the other women to roll tobacco in small newspaper pieces that burn their darkened lips. Instead, she stays at her workstation. She sits silently and she prays, she prays. She prays to Goddess Durga. She prays for protection. She prays for a good life. She prays for forgiveness. She prays for love. When it gets hot in the capital city, Kum Kum takes out a white embroidered handkerchief from her purse and wipes the purse of sweat from her forehead. Kum Kum likes flower patterns. Kum Kum loves embroidery. On Sundays, Kum Kum polishes her floors again broscoco. She brings out her mattress, leans it in the sun against the mango tree and beats it with a stick. She winnows her rice and her lentils for the week. She makes fruit pickles that she dries on her roof, and at the end of the day, she massages her feet with a slick of warm coconut oil. Kum Kum has a lover. But does Kum Kum have a lover? I'm not sure yet whether Kum Kum has a lover, but this is Kum Kum. This is Kum Kum, and I dream about her every day. She draws her life like a moving sculpture, a figure ever so ephemeral, becoming and unbecoming herself with every single one of my dreams. When I tell my mother that I am trans, she does not tell me about Persiani, Devakumar, Nila, or Badet. She doesn't even tell me about Kum Kum. Instead, my mother tells me that she is an uneducated woman who feels much pride, that I went to school, that I can read and write, that I speak English and I speak French. She tells me that because of her lack of education, she does not have the words for it, but she understands that people like me have always existed. She calls me ZOM-FAM, which in our local language means man, woman. I take pleasure in being ZOM-FAM. A man woman being neither Zom nor femme, yet being both Zom and femme, navigating a middle passage between being and becoming, an interstice where migrant bodies like mine find their truth, an undefinable space that maps the cartography of my skin, a hyphen that holds and wraps my gendered experience. ZOM-FAM, 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 ZOM-FAM. But my mother tells me that I shouldn't call myself ZOM-FAM. That she is an uneducated woman who does not know those things, but that she's happy that I have an education, that I can call myself trans, that I have the words, the language to describe the mystification of my gender, the longing to tear off my skin, along with my skin, my birth certificate, my passport, the state-sanctioned papers that dictate my gender. But deep inside me, there is a voice that speaks in the uneducated tones of my mother, and this voice embroiders itself from pore to pore onto the surface of my skin. There is a voice that does not have the words or the vocabulary, but reverberates goodness in my body, my heart beating the drums of my ancestors. There is a voice that did not go to school, does not speak English, does not speak French, yet echoes wisdom and truth in my bloodstreams, like the waves of the ocean that witness the loss of our languages. And that voice tells me that I do not need an imperial language to define myself, that I do not need to be trans in English or in French, that colonialism has already wrapped itself like a knot around our vocal cords, and even though our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies, this voice exists deep within, and it speaks like my mother, like my grandmother, like my great-grandmother, like the generations of women and femmes who fought to keep our language alive and pass it on from generation to generation. So, Mother, I will listen. I will listen to the voices of our ancestry, femme tongues that dictate that I speak out loud. And when I'm done tearing off my skin, along with my skin, my birth certificate, my passport, the state-sanctioned papers that dictate my gender, I will take every single piece of torn skin and paper. I will paint them in gold and put them back together with glistening stars as I so desire. I will build a femme armor, a fierce femme armor that I will celebrate, an unbreakable, unshakable object of love that I will hold together with respect and dignity. And I will call this armor ZOM-FAM, ZOM-FAM, ZOM-FAM. When I tell my mother that I am trans, her lips wobble a minor tremor, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She does not need to tell me. She does not need to tell me about our history, because our lineage is one of a secret language. Our lineage is one of a long, lost, secret language that we weave in between our intimacies. Thank you everyone for joining us. That was ZOM-FAM from the collection ZOM-FAM. I will now invite Jenny to join me for the next part of this book launch.
I mean, it's unfortunate that I need to speak at this moment because I'm speechless. And, you know, Kama, reading this book of poetry, reading it digitally, then holding it on the page is an experience that is so beautiful, but is so enriched by the gift that you've offered all of us tonight. And that is truly the singing of this poetry for us. So thank you so much. I truly cannot gather my thoughts and actually my emotions around what we've all just been, what we've all witnessed. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you, and can I say also thank you for being part of this journey. You've read, like, you know, earlier you've read the PDF version before it actually existed as an object in the world, and yeah, it just feels so meaningful, yeah, to be able to share this moment today. Thank you, Jenny.
I mean, the honor is all mine, and to see such a beautiful project in its various iterations is also a gift I don't take lightly. So thank you.
Thank you.
I am so excited to be in conversation with you tonight about your gorgeous work. I'd also like to remind audience members that the Q&A box is open in the Zoom webinar, so please feel welcomed to input questions or just comments of celebration and joy and love, because I think all of these things are welcomed here tonight. So I have a few questions that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, but since you are a person who is exponentially more clever than I am, I'm also open to you redirecting our discussion, because every time we speak, it goes down a different, unexpected path, and something magical emerges from that as well. So please don't feel sort of constrained by the over-preparedness of this, or my nerves, I guess. Let me begin by saying, for those of you who foolishly have not yet purchased and read this book, you know, it begins with a calling of muses. You know, but while this gesture, of course, reminds us of all of those traditional poetries, all of those literature courses we have slept through at different points in our lives, in ZOM-FAM, this invocation is also Black, it's brown, it's decolonial. This invocation is queer and trans, it's historic and present, futuristic. How does this gesture invocating these muses set the stage for what is to come?
Oh my God. Thank you for that question, and yeah, and for the engagement. You know, it's interesting. I mean, I know, so as you know, like, yes, the piece opens with the invocation, which I've always seen as like the prayer, right? Like, and actually up until the moment where you said it right now, I'm like, I didn't think about it as, oh, it's also an invoking of muses, which is like, oh, that's like part of a literary genre, right? And before you start your epic journey, you invoke the muses. And I had never put this together up until now. I didn't realize that this was actually, I'm like, oh yeah, this is part of a classical literary practice, which is clearly not where I was coming from in that sense. Like, I think for me, it was one of the things that was so important for me in this work, and you know, and not just this work, like I think in terms of where I'm at with my multidisciplinary artistic practice, you know, like, yes, I have a literary practice, but I also have like a performance of visual arts and installation practice, and typically it's the same questions that I'm exploring in different media. And I think for me that there's something that I really wanted to, yes, it is an invocation. I always say, like, it's an invocation in the sense of like it's a bringing of everybody, all the femme voices, all the femme tongues and beings and spirits that actually came before we did, right? Like, and actually allow me to exist now and allow me to have voice now. yeah, and that part was like really really important for me in terms of like increasingly I have been speaking of this work, but for the performance, when I finished mounting the entire show, I didn't get to show it to an audience yet. Hopefully someday, so the show was supposed to premiere in April. It got cancelled because of the pandemic. Then it was rescheduled for October. Then Montreal entered the red zone, theater shut down again. But one of the things that was interesting about also having finished the process of working on this performance, was realizing, I stopped talking of the work even as a performance. Now I say, oh, ZOM-FAM is a pilgrimage, or it's a prayer, like that's how I see it now, because it really, there's the work that exists on the page, but then there's also me in terms of like the person, right, and the sort of ongoing spiritual and physical journey, that and emotional journey in terms of my relationship to self, but also my relationship to ancestry, my relationship to femininity, that I had been exploring and working through for years actually. And by the time I was done, I was working on the show and this book was coming out. Like it really, there was something for me where, the invocation went at whole new levels. By the end of it, that's it. Like that's what I told my team. I was like, I'm not performing. Like my body and my voice is just a vessel, that just channeling and communicating with the femme spirits. And I think and it's something so deeply humbling as well, of like it's a loss of the I, it's a loss of the ego. And I think that part, that part is so important for me. Also, and in terms of the invocation, one of the questions that I always ask, particularly, that like when I'm working with, because I work with youth and stuff like that, and I always ask the question, what makes our presence possible, right? Like, because we don't exist just because we exist. We exist because there are lineages and forces that allow our being to emerge. So that was really like important for me, like, and in terms of what's next, I don't know. I mean, I think I'll continue. I think it's something that I'm like really exploring at the moment in all of my arts practices. And interestingly enough, it's a dissolving of the I, of that first person to actually just be more of a vessel, so to speak, for other forces in the universe.
Thank you. That's such a generous response, I think. And I truly believe that the work that is here on this pages and this performance is, it honors so much those ancestors and those people and their spirits that came before. It's just such a gorgeous expression of that, I think. So
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so fascinated to hear you talk about performance and performativity in this work. Because, you mentioned the trip that you made to Winnipeg a few years ago, and that was when we first met. And it was when you were speaking about some brilliant performance art that you were doing, some brilliant activism that was very much interwoven. And so I know you first as an educator, an activist, performance visual artist, all of the above. I mean, and here too, I think in ZOM-FAM, teaching and aesthetics and politics are braided together in a way that refuses, that naive assumption that these things can ever exist without the other. And so you've discussed a little bit about the sort of movement between stage and page in this work. And I'd love to hear more about how you see the roles of art and education and politics playing together in this work and also its other expressions.
Thank you. Oh my God, such good questions. I love it. Thank you, Jenny. Uh, I mean, I think that's the thing. Like for me, what I think right off the bat, the one thing that I will say is that for me, I do believe that actually politics is an aesthetic practice, right? As in, like, we live in a society that's structured in a particular way where certain bodies are visible, where we get to hear certain stories, we get to hear certain narratives, we get to like hear certain voices, and others are invisible, right? So that means that the world of politics in terms of how power is enacted is an aesthetic practice, because it's dealing with, like, what you can hear and what you can see, in that sense. And I think that's something, like, for me, yeah, within the political practice is already embedded an aesthetic practice. And then for me, then exploring, so I don't necessarily separate all of this, and and in my own life, like I like to say, it's all part of my life's work, right? I don't have like a community practice and then an arts practice and then my personal life. I'm like, no, it's those all emerge from the same beliefs and values, and there's a thread through all of them that actually guide all of those. So I think there's that to start with. I In that sense, and I think there are like multiple ways in which, of course, like then for me, the aesthetic intervention, just by the fact of even writing your story and putting it out into the world, right? Like the fact that the narrative that's not supposed to exist, that actually is put out into the world, like I think that does something politically, and that shifts the order that's supposed to be there. But I think for me also, the other part that I want to talk about is also interdisciplinarity, which is so present, like in my work, and that for me, I see really as a decolonial practice, right? Like it's moving across and between performance and visual arts and poetry and all of it, like, because that's the thing. It's like, even with the book, like I'm like, oh, it has a visual quality to it, which and for me, like working in the in the intersection of the spaces is actually, first of all, pushing back pushing back against colonial notions of structures, right? Like, and disciplines which are colonial disciplines, and the binary, right? Like, which is absolutely a colonial tool, including the gender binary. And then it's, on the one hand, it's that, but then I think the hybridity, so to speak, like those interspaces, also allow for an emergence of something new, so to speak, right? Like, as if we're already trapped within the colonial structures. One of the questions that I had to ask myself in working on this book was, how am I going to articulate a decolonial poetics by using an imperial language? I'm writing in English, right? Like, so then there was like an entire play. For me, it was, yes, integrating the Creole and the Tamil and the Hindi and all the ancestral languages in it, yes. But then it was also playing with the language in terms of there's no punctuation in the book and like stuff like that, but also bringing the performative practice or the visual practice into how the poetry is laid out on the page. For me, those are all multiple ways in which it allows for a different form of enunciation, a different kind of vocabulary and aesthetics and politics to emerge. So increasingly, yes, that the interdisciplinary working, in those hybrid spaces, for me, is the space where I feel that a decolonial and a queer trans enunciation can actually emerge.
I completely agree that it's in these in between areas that the most sort of creative potential and disruptive potential, I think, exists. And I think that you do that so beautifully. One of the notes I have annotated in your gorgeous book is how all of this white space between different words is actually, when I'm reading it to myself, is a place where I'm like gasping for breath in between those things. And to me, that signifies like the life that is being sort of like the bodily reminder of life and corporeality that exists in those in-between spaces that I think that you've just explained so clearly to me. This sort of links to another thought that I had about your writing. I mean, of course, this collection breaks boundaries, it breaks binaries, it breaks all of those expectations, as you've just explained, thematically, absolutely. But I also think in terms of literary genre, I see the fingerprints of essay on these long poems. I see the fingerprints of nonfiction, the audacity of epic, as we've sort of hinted at earlier. That journey, though, that calling back to the origins. I mean, the lists that you provide in this are they just flood my mind with memories of those canonical genres, but then what you're doing differently with them. I see moments of very cerebral thoughtfulness about the long poem. I also see playful moments in this. And I think that this is also a really important point, that there's also a lot of humor in this text. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about how one creates such a cohesive whole collection, which this is, and story and journey, when there are echoes of so many diverse, literary, musical, theatrical influences here.
Thank you. Oh my God. Like, thank you for this is such a generous engagement with the work. I'm like, wow. And it's opening up new things for me, which is always amazing, where I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about this. Is that what I'm doing? So thank you again, Jenny. Yeah, because I hadn't thought about this right now until you said it. Like, because for me, it was like, it's a poetry collection. True, it started as spoken word pieces, and now it's like then it became a manuscript for the stage, and then it became a book. But I actually didn't think about it as, I mean, I knew it was long form poetry, in the sense of like, it's long form poetry, it's not insta poetry. There are only 8 poems and they're long, like that I knew I was doing, but I didn't realize that with that until you mentioned it right now, that there was basically, I would say, like, I'm tempted to say the influence of all my practices, because like the thing about it is that, like, yes, this is my debut poetry collection, but one of the things that I've been saying, because I've been getting a lot of the question of like, how long have you been writing? And I'm like, about for the past 15 years or so. But one of the things about my writing practice over the past 15 to 20 years, that's the thing. Like, I wrote like really, really sad poetry when I was a teenager. But then over the years, like I've worked as a journalist for an independent press for a while. Like I mean, I was, I wrote a master's thesis because I have a master's degree and I was in academia. I have a deep interest in theory, generally speaking, and critical theory, which is what my studies were in. And I had a blog for many years, for many years, when blogging was a thing, which in the early, like 2007 to 2010 approximately. But I kept a blog for many years. I dabbled into, there was a point of time where I was writing sonnets. Like that was the kind of poetry that I was writing. And I think one of the things that I realize now, it's like all those, it's all those bits and pieces, right? Like it's all those bits and pieces of just being in the process, right? Like exploring the writing, finding what is it that, like, it wasn't even intentional. I didn't start 15 years ago saying I'm going to spend the next 15 years to figure out what is my voice. I was just playing with the writing, exploring, seeing what I love, what I don't love, and I think all of this then comes into this work. I think one of the probably elements that I will mention is that all those pieces, pretty much all of them, were birthed first as spoken word pieces. And I think there's something about spoken word pieces, because spoken word gave me freedom. Like really, when I started writing poetry quote unquote seriously when I started doing spoken word. So I didn't even write for the page. I had moved to Montreal in 2013. I discovered like the underground spoken word scenes, and I was like, this is where all the queer and trans people of color are, and you're all reading and talking poetry. Cool. I'm gonna try this too. Like that's really how it started for me. And I think there's something about the spoken word, right? Because you're yes, you're performing a poem, but you're also preaching, like you're also like, I'm just like, where do you draw the line between like all the speeches that I have given at the Trans March in Montreal and then my spoken word pieces, right? Because both of them are actually public speaking. And I hadn't thought about this really until your question right now, but I think there's something about the spoken word as well that gave me permission to bring, like, yeah, that sort of like touch of academic element and theoretical element and political discourse, but also here's my story, right? Like framed into a poetic way. I think the spoken word is what like strengthened and allowed me to bring all those elements in the writing.
Oh, that's such an amazing journey that you've described, and the empowerment, I think, of particular genres when they allow people to speak back, and to challenge, but also take pieces and improve them. I think from those educations that have been foisted upon through colonialism, etc. We have questions from the audience that I hope you're up for. I encourage more folks to add those questions. That'd be really great. Oh, we have a question from Derek Mascarenhas, the author of The Beautiful Coconut Dreams from Book.
Which I'm actually reading right now, which I find like, I was like...
Actually, these circles of BIPOC are quite small. And I heard that you were reading it currently. So I'm very excited to pose this question on behalf of Derek. He says, thank you for that lovely reading. Wondering if there was anything that surprised you in the process of writing this book or in its emergence in the world.
I think I don't know about the process of writing. I mean, I think all of it was surprising, probably. Like all of it was a discovery. But I think in terms of ever since it's been out in the world, one of the things, and you touched on this earlier, Jenny, so I think that's the part that I'm going to talk about. I didn't realize actually, and I'm so touched, like I'm so, it's something that I actually love. I didn't realize how much joy was actually in the book. To be honest, like I personally did not realize. And I remember when I was working on the performance, I was working with my dramaturg at a point of time. My dramaturg actually pointed out to my laugh, where he was like, do you realize you have like this massive cackle when you laugh? Like, and he was like, do you remember the first time we had our first meeting, we were in a cafe, and then at a point of time you laughed, and the entire cafe turned around and looked at you. And I was like, oh, I had never paid attention to this. But he was bringing that up because he was like, basically he was telling me we need to capture, he was like, as a dramaturg, he was like, in your performance, when do we bring about those moments of joy? And ever since then, and that was a couple of years ago, because it was like a 2-year process to work on this performance. And ever since then, like, yeah, I've been thinking a lot of that part of like, oh yeah, I didn't, it's not conscious. Like I hadn't like been aware or quite conscious of like my own joyful self, like, like probably something that I do, but I was never aware of it. And one of the things that has touched me the most and surprised me and that I found so beautiful and makes me so happy ever since the book came out is how people react to the book by telling me it brought me joy. And it's almost like every time somebody says that for me, I'm like, oh, my big cackle laugh actually translated into the book, even if I didn't know I was doing this. And this is like this has been the biggest surprise for me. I didn't realize that the book was also joyful and it brought people joy, and it's just been, yeah, it's been one of my, that's been the surprising thing, and to me as well, it brings me a lot of joy. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is one of the things that makes this such a special book of poetry, is that it, the speaker looks directly at violence and oppression and the legacies of those things, and doesn't let any of those things off the hook. But there's also so much pleasure. The speaker has so much pleasure, I think, and play and humor. It's like all of the emotions all at once. And at any given day, when I'm reading different moments, I'll feel tremendously overwhelmed by emotion in various directions, but it'll switch the next time that I come to that poem. So it really is a book that allows its reader to live with it in the present moment, and differently each time. So thank you so much. We don't have any other questions. I feel that everyone is just awed by your brilliance, as is always the case when you take the stage. So we are coming up to the hour, but I just want to thank you again for including me in this small part of your journey in life, because you do so much and you're going to continue to do so much. This is one chapter of it, and I just really feel touched and honored to have been here to watch it.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, thank you for being part of this conversation. Thank you for such a generous and rich engagement. Like, it just feels so meaningful to me as well. You know, I feel like there are like there's people across the land, and it feels like, oh, we're all in this together. So it's just so meaningful to have this connection. I want to say thank you again to Metonymy Robinson for hosting the event today, everybody who was working behind the scenes. I encourage all of you to support your local bookstores at the moment. This is so necessary and so needed, and particularly within the context in which we're living. I also want to say thank you to Kay Pettigrew, who did the closed captions for this event, but also for pretty much all the events of this book tour, and my wonderful publishers, Ashley and Oliver at Metonymy Press, for being such superstars. So thank you everyone for joining, and I think John might be coming back for some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Kama. What a beautiful and inspiring evening. I'm going to keep the gratitude rolling along as well. So many thanks to Kama and Jenny for such a warm, engaging, and generous conversation. And to all you viewers, both now and in the future, for your presence and attention. Much gratitude to Kay, again, as well, for deftly handling the captions tonight. Copies of ZOM-FAM are available from McNally Robinson booksellers, either by phone or online. Though we may be closed to the public, curbside pickup and delivery, both within Winnipeg and beyond, is available. I'd encourage you to do whatever you can to source a copy of this book. The rewards are immense, and this is a volume that I'm personally looking forward to sitting with and revisiting soon. There's so much life and so much wisdom contained within its pages. I'd also encourage you, as we close, if you have not already, to look into the work being done by the good folks at Metonymy Press. They're a comparatively young press, but one that's already made a significant impact while demonstrating a singular and forward-thinking editorial vision. And I'm exceedingly excited to see what they have in store for the future. It's been lovely spending the evening with you all. Please do have a wonderful night.